How's it going, folks? Welcome to Learning cEDH, the podcast dedicated to teaching you everything you need to know about competitive Commander. I'm your host, Matthew. I'm once again joined by my co-host, Eric. And we are both once again joined by a guest. Would you like to introduce yourself to the people at home?
Hi, my name is Max Sternberg. In the Magic world, I'm better known as WoundedSatellite. I am also a co-host on the Colors Are a Crutch podcast with my wonderful co-host, Max P, the Florian guy.
Heck yeah. And so we're going to be talking about Max's performance in cEDH. Spoiler, it's been good. As well as the general sort of performance of Kinnan, the position of Kinnan, which has been a deck that surprisingly there's like a little bit of controversy behind sometimes, but has been one of the like most consistent performers. If you've watched our quarterly updates, especially, you'll know it's been doing well. I think it's trending upward. And especially recently at big events, it's just been like consistently top four, double top four, winning an event, and just really putting on a show out there. The Command Tower software by Eminence Gaming is perfect for hosting your own TCG events with features such as easy to create event registration for 4-player and 1v1 Swiss-based games. Event management has never been so simple, and it's web-based, so no downloads required. Sign up for just $5 at eminence.events/subscribe.
Max, do you want to talk about how you got into just playing Kenan?
Yeah, more than
Because
happy
I've looked up all your results and I've watched your literal results as you've like steadily increased, at least with the trackable like tournaments online. So it's really cool to actually watch like how vastly you've improved, especially sticking with this particular commander. So I think that'd be a great like starting point.
I do have to give a shout out to Tyler from Play to Win for doing his introduction to Kinnan. And what really connected with me was, as a player watching their content, I connected with Tyler and thought we had a similar mindset about the game. And what really hit home when he was talking about Kinnan was him saying that it is a deck he never got bored of. I came from mid-power casual Magic, where my favorite deck was Muldrotha. I have like 30 casual decks, and I get bored of them really, really quickly. I can only do the Elf thing twice in a row, or do the Is It Storm thing twice in a row. But when I was playing Muldrotha, because it has this diversity of play lines and so many options and how to solve the puzzle, I never got bored of it. And so him saying he never got bored of Kinnan hit home with me as maybe that's a cEDH deck for me. Additionally, I really love Nyx Bloom Ancient, so that was exciting to try and play some of those big baddies in cEDH. And playing the deck and learning it over time, I don't get bored of it because I play it like a control deck. I'm not just trying to close the blinders and play solitaire and do my thing. I'm trying to fight against the table. It's a different journey every time to get to the eventual win, and it's really engaging for me and really fun.
Kinnan is always a big one that I point. We both do point people towards, like newer players or just like in general. If someone's like, hey, I don't know a lot about cEDH, where's a good place for me to start? Because partially because it is good, like we'll get into it. It's one of those decks that is both beginner friendly and like top 5 potential list in just the format. But then also your point of, and that Tyler had mentioned, like it's a fun deck. It has, I think, a surprising amount of versatility in the list, because the way that you can, even just playing the same list, not even talking about different builds, you can be like, I'm a super dedicated, I'm just going to get as much mana as fast as I can and flip Kenan. I'm going to turbo out of Assault Monolith as quickly as I can, go for the win. I'm going to sit back and play a control plan. And then the more like your approach, wherever you start with, it's just going to like grow out as you see all 3 of these things are possible in like the same list. And you're able to like pivot between these, do them all in the same game. In one game, you have a hand that might lend you towards like, oh, I have 3 rocks in my opener, let's just go burr. Or you'll have that like, okay, well, I had to mold 5, I got 2 counter spells, let's kind of play the sit back and chill plan. And it really is a super fun deck. And you also get like pop-off moments that don't really happen with a lot of other decks, like you said, where you can just, oh, I hit the Nyx Bloom Ancient on like turn 2 or turn 3, and you just get this like crazy new way that you get to play. It's almost just like a randomizer effect that you get when you have just like, oh, there's a Void Winnower now. Like this is a whole different context for this game, or like Consphinx specifically. It's a deck that I've really enjoyed, especially getting to like cheat out those things. Like I played the other day in an event and got to do like turn 2 double mana crypt thanks to Copy Artifact. Or no, turn 1 double mana crypt, turn 2 Consphinx, turn 3 double Consphinx with Phantasmal Image and Kinnan. It just feels so insane. Like so many other decks don't get to play with like cards that are still good. I think that's the thing people might miss when they talk about like, oh, Kinnan is just winota, which we'll get into. But Kenan can power these things out. You can play them even without Kenan. They just are better with him. And they are, like I said, game warping pieces that introduce like a totally different element and are obviously incredibly powerful in like this draw engine focused, format with cards like Consphinx.
Yeah, I regularly call Kinnan the serotonin king because he's constantly pumping that into your bloodstreams. And the versatility of the deck to be a deck that is a true mid-range pile that has the really valid stacks and turbo-based game plans it makes it hard to play against, makes it always a different journey, kind of how I said. But I think when you're looking at introducing newer players to Kinnan, I would recommend a proactive build first, because I do agree the basic play lines of Kinnan of land, dork, pass, land, Kinnan, rock, go for Basalt Monolith. That play line is pretty simple. And I think a proactive build that's not as focused on holding up your mana and fighting against the table, it would be easier for someone to get into cEDH. And then after they see a little bit over time of like, oh, me just doing my own thing isn't always the highest percentage win chance, because personal opinion, I think the control build is slightly higher win percentage overall, but both are super, super valid. Then I think getting them into a more control role after they have better threat assessment of the format and understanding of the format will be better overall. But early on, I think learning the deck a more proactive build is better.
Yeah, I want to touch on what you said earlier about what kind of drew you into Kenan. I think Kenan follows this really fundamental thing that Magic did a really great job of years ago, was creating, and it literally brings the traditional Magic player out in you. Magic's kind of always been defined by dragons and elves, and while I don't know if there's not like the inherent dragon of the red variety in this deck, but what it does, it provides like tremendous amount of mana advantage. It plays a lot of fun cards that just happen to be broken once they're applied with that additional mana. Anytime you double mana, or not even inherently double mana, but for like 1 to 2, that's a double. But from like 2 to 3, an additional 1. Magic is way easier on it's completely different on Axis. It's like taking like a standard deck and going to Legacy, and Kenan really kind of does that. And it takes these cards that traditionally, like in a deck that doesn't necessarily produce this type of mana from not just the rocks, but its creatures as well. It just really breaks that. And that's one thing I really like about Kenan, especially, is just how it can appeal from the competitive scene, but also it just has a very casual feel to it in terms of just it feels like good old traditional Magic. Mana and elves. Like, is there anything like outside of 40 lightning bolts in your deck that's any like different? Not really. So it's a phenomenal deck in that regard. I think it hits that homage on both of them. So
yeah, anyone who's a Timmy who likes slamming big creatures and just making a ton of mana, it's a blast. The deck is so much fun to play.
So I want to talk about, because obviously so this is where you started, and it's also where you're still at for the most part, at least in your tournament cEDH experience. So what has kept you on Kinnan as somebody who is, looking to compete at that like highest level of cEDH that we're at? Like, we're at a point now where I think cEDH is at its peak, and it just keeps moving up in terms of like the competition, the amount of events that we're getting. Shout out to Eminence. And what is it about Kinnan that either you find that is positioned really well and works in favor of you and other players who are performing really well with the deck, or is it that you just don't want to move away from the deck because it's just fun and you're just choosing to compete with a deck that you enjoy and it just so happens to also be good?
Kind of all three to some extent. First and foremost, the deck is genuinely still fun to play, and I really enjoy playing it. In terms of its position in the meta, I've echoed to people many times that I believe Kinnan is a very meta resilient deck. As I say in my primer, like, you have very real game plans against all of the different base turbo mid-range stacks metas. Right now, we're definitely in more of a turbo mid-range leaning meta, especially with the rounds getting shorter, which fortunately my build was inherently going up against. When I was originally testing with Kinnan and getting into the deck, the pods I was against most often were, Rockside, Dihada, and lots of those decks that are pretty quick. And so I'm a believer that Kinnan is super favored in the mid-range and stacks metas, and our weakness is people getting under us in the first couple turns. So I'm playing all of the things that deal with turbo decks. I'm in a high interaction package, all the free spells, Endurance, Force of Vigor to deal with things. I've got all the creatures like Wandering Archaic, Perplexing Chimera, Glenalendra, stuff that really makes turbo decks lives difficult and buys me extra turns into the mid game. If you're in a mid range meta, we just have value pieces that outgrind, and as long as we can, consistently progress and control, we can find that window and eventually get to a win. We're really good at just getting things hard to deal with. I don't think we need the silence effects and the grand abolishers. We just kind of overwhelm and suffocate over time. And in stacks metas, I mean, Kinnan plays around stacks so well. If you get too many stacks on the board, it can be a problem. But if someone's like, oh, he's done as a collector, if we're not just done because there's a collector, if we're not just done because there's a Linvala, like we can deal with any individual piece pretty well and work around it. We can pivot really fortunately. Oh, in terms of the deck's actual power level, I genuinely at this point in time do believe that Kinnan is like the second best deck if it's piloted properly. I think that Kinnan has a very high skill floor to pilot at a high level. It is a deck that, because it's really, my friends have told me, like when they play against other Kinnan pilots, they feel like it's on easy mode because they're just like, oh, I got to 7 mana, I spin Kinnan, I don't care what's in my hand. Oh, I did the Kinnan thing, I feel like I did good this game. When no, it's about holding up your mana, interacting. Like the spinning is an outlet if you have the extra mana. It's not the primary game plan. And I think a lot of people play the deck kind of wrong and a little too like focused on the upside play of just spinning Kinnan, because that is always the highest upside play you can have. But I think being patient, not being greedy, being willing to just like take the game as it comes and dictate the pace of it with what you can do is super important. And I think that Kinnan, I think Najeela is the generically strongest deck in the format. And then I think played by a top tier pilot like me or Pingmeister or several other really good pilots, I think Kinnan then comes in at number 2 with how good I think it actually can perform. And then I think you get like Tibet and Blue Farm and stuff in the next tier. So I genuinely believe it's one of the strongest decks, and it's super fun, and I love it.
Yeah, it's definitely on a tear as of like late. It was always kind of there, but like really just people kind of like dived into it and go, this deck's amazing. We're going to play it, and we're going to play it in large numbers, and it's just putting up consistent results. You already touched on it, but just to clarify, because you said there's basically like 2 different builds of Kinnan currently right now in the cEDH meta?
4, I would say.
4.
Yeah, I would say in terms of how Kinnan breaks down, which one of them doesn't really see play right now in tournaments, or at least successfully. You have Turbo Kinnan, then you have Stacks Kinnan, which is like all in on flips. I have like no artifact tutors. Turbo is obviously like some of them don't even play Seaboard Muse, like they are every artifact tutor doing everything. And then you have the mid-range, which breaks into 2 forms. You get mid-range leaning proactive, and you get mid-range leaning control. And you see like Pingmeister's list is a really good example of mid-range leaning proactive. We both have both the spin and turbo game plans, but his is more focused on the proactive. I'm going to make him have it. And then you have mid-range leaning control, which is my list is where I am more focused on being grindy and holding up my mana, but I still have the turbo game plan if I have it.
Regardless of whether or not those other builds are even seeing play, the fact that the deck has these different modes, like that it's kind of all encompassed in the shell, is pretty excellent. I think that gives the deck where, for whatever reason, if the meta did shift to where, let's say, a Turbo Kinnan deck was the right choice for that particular, tournament, you have that in your tool belt. You have that in the bag of tricks that if you really needed to go more turbo slanted, you could. It's not like you have to do this like rework a build thing, play test and stuff. I mean, I'm sure you would, but regardless, it's just like it's there. The fact that it has, it's like kind of like a, it's really like Batman if you think about it. It just has this utility belt, and it has the answer for any situation.
Yeah, always having that answer is part of what I love about the deck. Like we never feel like we're out of the game. There's always an out somewhere in the deck.
Because I think, like we were talking about, it's a good deck to give a beginner with a certain slant and with a like an understanding. Like there's a more beginner focused way you can play this deck that will maybe give you more early success, but that doesn't necessarily equate to like the peak of what the deck does. And I think like you had mentioned with like the spinning part, I think some of the misconceptions around both like the weaknesses of the deck and whether the deck is, like we mentioned, like it's a winota waiting to happen, which I guess we can get into here, is around the idea of like, if you play the deck like it's winota and you're just trying to flip off the top and that's your game plan, then yeah, you have this high roll, low roll kind of experience that I think a lot of the decks aren't even built to really do as much anymore. Like I think the Kinnan plan is more focused on what is successful, and that's not pray that all of your flips are good and get them flipping as early as possible. Like you're mentioning, where almost both the like mid-range slant builds aren't necessarily trying to do that. Like one is trying to go towards a win, usually like running way more tutors for Basalt Monolith, for example, or like you're talking about looking way more to take advantage of like the grindy plan. And I think that misconceptions of like looking at the commander and seeing that nice cute ability and seeing like the potential high roll of it is like misleading some pilots into thinking that the deck is like pigeonholing it into that sort of game plan. And making what I would consider like false assumptions on how the deck is supposed to operate and like the weakness of the deck based on just looking at the commander, not necessarily looking at the way people are actually playing and succeeding right now.
What do you think, like, for you just being a Kinnan pilot and being in the Twitter sphere, and I guess, is it still Twitter? Like, what is it actually called? Is it just X Corp? Is that what it
I
is?
just
Until
I
they
just joined.
change until they
Yeah.
change the URL, I'm gonna still call it Twitter. Until it's x.com or whatever. I'll call it
We'll
Twitter.
say social media. We'll say just say
Yeah.
social media. You see a
Yeah.
ton of just very, I would say very generic takes. Like what Matthew's alluding to is just whether they're right or wrong. I'm not a Kinnan expert. That's why we got you on here. Basically, you see it like, oh, just play removal. That's what stops Kinnan. Can you basically help debunk some of these theories or these just, blanket statements that people make about the deck in general?
Yeah. Do you want to give me a specific statement and I'll respond to that?
Yeah,
Or
I want to dive a little bit deeper on comparing it like Kinnan versus Winota.
okay, yeah, nothing like Winota at all. I understand the basic, superficial, like, oh, they both flip things off the top, but the way the decks function are so differently because Winota's game plan is I'm going to get Winota triggers most of the time. Maybe I play a couple of stacks pieces from hand, but I am fully based around my commander. You kill Winota, the game is over. That's really it. That's the gist of Winota. It's very fragile, and that's why it doesn't perform anymore in tournaments. I win tons of games where I never cast Kinnan because there's a Drannith Magistrate on turn one, and that's fine. It's my deck is at its strongest with Kinnan, and I need Kinnan to eventually combo, but like we'll get there. It's not an issue. Yeah, so I get the comparison there. People say, oh, just treat Winota Kinnan like Winota, and you have to kill the commander. Kinnan's really cheap. You can kill him a few times. Either way, like we have so many rocks, we have so many mana dorks. You got to attack all the mana, otherwise it's just like I don't care. I'll just cast my big things anyway. I still have the mana for executing my game plan. It's just stronger with Kinnan. Killing the Kinnan doesn't fully take me out of the game or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a really just like excellent way to approach that, because I think a lot of times people get really like kind of into their decks like more emotionally versus like the actual play of the deck and what how the deck performs. Like I know I play Corvold. It's not necessarily a great performing deck. And so I have a
Sorry
very
for
like I have a very like realistic expectation of like what that deck can and can't do. So I never argue with people about it. I'm like, yeah, it's exactly what you think it is, you know. But Kennan's one of those things. I think also just having access to blue and green as particularly them together really give it the ability to do all these things that you're talking about because green, as we've seen again on social media, is really regarded as kind of the worst singular color in the game. But when it's with Kenan, it's a completely different story. What's your take on just how powerful these green cards are and what do they actually do for your deck?
I think green is great. I mean, the greatest thing about green is the second best tutor color because it tutors creatures. So if your game plan is built around creatures, then green is almost as good as black for tutors. Not actually, obviously, black is unconditional, but they're so effective and they're so consistent and there's so many of them. So that gives you this flexible silver bullet game plan where you're able to play all of these cards like Gilded Drake or Glenelendra or Chimera or One Archaic to their most powerful ability because you have them when you need them. Where normally they're a little more matchup dependent. Yeah, it uses green in a way where it can be really flexible with its effect. And it's kind of like cocaine green because it's super fast green, which green isn't normally known for its speed, but it just kind of ramps them out really, really quickly with mana. And then it plays all the big stompers that kind of lock down everything. Though a lot of the lockdown stompers are also blue, so it's a little confusing in how to compare it there. I think a really good example, though, is like where green isn't normally utilized in other cEDH decks is the way it's used in casual is it does give you those big stompy creatures. And I think Kinnan does a great job with like Thorn Mammoth of like completely taking these effects that you would look at and you say this is an unplayable card in cEDH, but when you have the ability to actually get it on the battlefield, who's beating a Thorn Mammoth? Like who completely says you can't play creatures onto the board?
Not many. Not many. I don't think a lot of people are beating just in some of the creatures in general. Like Consphinx is probably going to be one of the biggest creatures on the board, like
Yeah.
90% of the time anyway.
Swat down
So.
a Crom, no problem.
You know how many times people have like shown a dismember and then said, "Oh, it's a fucking 4/6."
Yeah. I think one is just a basic lesson in sort of like evaluating not just like cards but entire colors in context of what they offer for like your commander, your game plan. Like Najila is, you're talking about like you think probably the generically best deck currently. Najila has like a decent amount of green cards and it has access to all of the best cards in the game. It's choosing to run them because they contribute to Najila's game plan. Again, like you're talking about with Kinnan, these effect. You get a Thorn Mammoth in play. Yeah, when you see it in the deck, you're like, oh, what's that do? You see it on the stack, or you see the trigger on the stack, you're like, oh my god, what do I do with this thing? How do I beat this?
Yeah, which I think in comparison to a deck like Najeela gets to run incredibly high card quality that also conveniently does have a good amount of synergy with cards like Samet, Derevi, Grim Hireling, etc. The difference is, I think, when you get to a lot of these high color piles, they are decks built around consistent card quality that sometimes sacrifices synergistic power just for the sake of a card being so good that you have to run it. And I think when you get to a lower color pile like Kinnan, it's really all about synergy, and you are just putting all of these cards in a deck that work really, really well together, and they all multiply against each other with their effect because they all intertwine and just like make each other better. Versus just like, oh, I play Ranger Captain because why would I not play Ranger Captain? I'm in white.
And I think it's important that, like, I'm assuming when you're saying this, you're not just talking about, like, when people think of a synergy deck, they might think of Winota or like Krakashima, but this is like a deck being synergistic, not necessarily cards that work with the commander. Like you were saying, you can win games without Kinnan. A lot of times you have to do it. And the rest of the deck works well together, not just saying, oh, my mana dorks, they synergize with Kinnan. Like, yeah, of course they do. But also, mana dorks, pretty good. Pretty good cards in general.
Mana dorks are pretty good, but I mean, you get all these overlapping effects. Like, oh, the mana inherently lets me pass my big creatures. Oh, I play Clone Effects to deal with Dockside, but I can also copy my own Glenelender and then counter your spell and have it come in as something else. Like, oh, I'm playing all these dorks to trigger my Thorn Mammoth, or I have all this mana that works with Nyxbloom. I have these specific synergies like Manamo to work with the One Ring and Gaia's Cradle. Like everything just kind of works with each other in a lot of ways.
I want, when I saw the Glenelendra in your build, I think that was the first time I had seen it, and I was just like, that makes so much sense. I really wanted to jam it in here. Like I haven't put it in my build yet. I am usually a Rockside player, and lately I've been playing some Najeela just because like my store is so unbelievably stacksy with like just the jankiest weird stacks piles, but like I just have to respect it. If I don't win turn 2, then I'm pretty much out of the game with Rockside. And I love that Kenan lets me sometimes just have turn 1s and 2s that are just like just as crazy as Rockside is capable of. But then also it's just like, oh, it's turn 8. I feel like my chances to win are just going up like as this game goes on.
Yeah, a lot of times I say the longer the game goes, the higher my win percentage gets. And that's why I'm not in a rush to like force a win attempt. It's just like, whatever, I'll just keep stacking out the board. Keep making it difficult.
Let's talk about your win percentage for a second. You've been performing super well in tournaments. That's actually a great segue into this. You've been performing super well in tournaments. I think we messaged a little bit about it, but I'm just curious, do you have a particular tournament process you go through, like testing, pre, post, intra, all that type of stuff?
I did early on. Honestly, I have not changed the list in like a month and a half now, just because it's been really consistent. It's exactly where I want it to be. But that did come from a lot of testing. That's not just like, I think this is best. I really did. The process of getting into Kinnan, I like built the deck in early 2023, and it was just like a kind of throw together version similar to Tyler's, which actually the original one had Glenelender because that was in my Muldrotha mid-power build, so I wanted to try it. But it was so bad early on because I just got priority bullied out of the game with it. I didn't know how to play it. But yeah, I like got to play maybe a couple times a month for a couple months, and then I moved to Costa Rica at the end of April, and just like immediately had nothing to do for 2 weeks. I played cEDH all day, every day, and just started testing like every imaginable Kinnan card over the next month. So I've like, if you look at the sideboard of my list, it's like 40 cards deep. I've tested all of those extensively, and so I kind of came down to the list I'm at right now. So now I feel really, really comfortable with it list wise. In terms of tournament process, gone through a few different things. I don't have like a consistent, every single one's the same one. When I was in Costa Rica, a lot of times I would wake up in the morning, I would actually go swim in the pool, and I would do like underwater breathing exercises to kind of chill myself out. I really enjoyed doing like the breath exercises, just like holding your breath as long as you can. Doing that kind of stuff helps me level out in the morning, wakes me up a little bit. Nowadays, I'm not in Costa Rica. The last few times what I've done is actually very funny. I woke up, I think it was like before Mox Masters August, and I like checked Facebook on my phone, and I hit a reel, and I scrolled to the next one, and it was a bikini bottom gangster rap of Patrick and Plankton, just like shooting up the entire town. And I don't know, it was just like, it was really hype, and it got me in the right energy, and I sent it to my friends, and I said, top 4 guaranteed, I'm out for blood today, and I did. And so now I've been listening to that the last few mornings on repeat for like 5 minutes before I get started, just getting me in the zone. Yeah, no, it's ridiculous, but it works. And if you look on like the Kinnan Discord, I've posted the video in the memes page, you can find it. And then, I mean, during the day, I don't normally eat breakfast, but I will try and eat breakfast on a tournament day. I definitely drink a Monster in the morning. I do enjoy my white Monsters. And then throughout the day, I think it's important to like kind of stay locked in, but take a break at some point. Like I know a lot of people want to take a bunch of breaks. I'm very big on like playing the fun games with people when you decide to intentional draw, like seeing if they'll just play for fun. Because I think keeping your brain in that place is really, really good. Some people get tired from it, and I totally understand that. But I think it's better to stay like a level of locked into the strategy of it all and still play those games seriously. It's really important to stay calm throughout the day. I think it's a huge thing. A lot of people get flustered and stressed, and I think I used to get a lot more flustered and stressed in my first couple tournaments. But like feeling your heart pound when you're about to go for a win attempt and just taking a few breaths and chill yourself out, and like just remember that it doesn't really matter, and just staying in that like chill, calm, monotone, hangout tone is like really, really good. Really, really good. And like setting that tone with the games, I think is really, really helpful. I start every single tournament game with like a couple of jokes. I'll always try and get someone with a guess what chicken butt. I think it just sets like a nice, like we're having fun.
Classic.
We're not here to be sweaty and hate each other just because this is for money. Like let's play an enjoyable game. Let's all be friendly and have a good time. And those games are just so much less taxing. I had a couple tournaments where it was really sweaty, like multiple games in a row, and that's where I feel tired.
I often find it can definitely be just taxing in general. Like you're sitting there for like, depending on how long you make it in the event, I guess like 10 to like 13, 14 hours, depending on how long it goes. And it's like, I definitely think like an energy level and like a game plan and like a mind state that is like maintainable throughout that entire experience is like really key. Like for me, I just get like, so just sitting in front of my computer all day. Usually like that's usually like what I'm already doing. And then like, oh, it's my Saturday, to not have to do anything. What am I going to do? Sit in front of my computer for 13 more hours? It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, it can really drag you down, especially if you're not like, you let yourself get into like a bad headspace, like you were talking about, where it's just like you get a little too sweaty, you get a little too flustered and frustrated, and you don't like catch yourself on that. It's going to really drag you down, I think, and really drag down your performance. I like that you pointed that out.
Yeah, staying calm is huge, and especially like this last Mox Masters, I was sick with the flu all day, is what I think it was at this point. And I kind of told myself I was just gonna do my inner Zen, and I just like played very slow and monotonously and purposefully, and was just like sniffling and coughing my way along. It worked. It got there.
So basically, a lot of the tournaments you've played they've been primarily online, correct?
Yeah, so I was living in Costa Rica before. So
Mhm.
my first, so this last Mox Masters was tournament 10 for me. So the first 8 were just every Mox Masters and Chaos May through August. Those 8 tournaments were the only 8 I'd played. And then I moved back to Columbus, Ohio to stay with a buddy while I looked for work. And conveniently, someone was like, "Oh, SCG Con is that weekend, like after you get there." So I was like, "Oh, I'll sign up for that." So that was my first ever in-person tournament, was SCG Con Columbus, which I was fortunate to come in second place overall in. That was a super fun day, really great experience to get to meet like Comedian and Tyler and all the Playing with Power people, and like these people who I've played online with and against, and hang out with them for a couple days was an absolute blast. Meet a bunch of my friends from the Play to Win Discord as well that came down for it. So that was super cool. So that was my first ever in-person tournament, and now I just had Mox Master September, which was tournament number 10, and then I think the Invitational will probably be my next in-person tournament. That's large. I might have like a small one at a local game store coming up or something. The online space, I mean, we're so fortunate that exists in 2023. I mean, it's amazing to connect all these people from around the world and give them the opportunity to get into the format. Because like I wouldn't have any of the friends that I have right now from this community if it wasn't for those tournaments existing. It's a super great thing.
Being in Columbus, you're kind of in the mecca of like Midwestern tournament magic in general. So that's a great place to be. So you've got quite a bit of, there's like, I always feel like there's always like some form of like GP level event or SEG. There's always an SEG there. And then you've got, the invitational, which is, spoilers for anybody who don't know, you can actually go to that event and play because they actually have a last chance qualifier on Friday. And then they have a 4K on Saturday that is different from the actual invitational itself. So it's basically open to anybody to go to. So that's a great, another big tournament that we have, like just literally here in like what, 40 some odd days, maybe 40, 50 days, somewhere in there. So
Yeah, it definitely feels like the first like event of that size focused on cEDH. We have like so many different events going on, and like especially when you hear like a last chance qualifier, that just immediately makes you think of just like like a really big prestigious kind of event of just like, oh man, can I make it? Like, and you have like when you have like the plot lines, and like especially when they've done stuff with like the player profiles that we recommended. Thank you, or you're welcome, Playing with Power. uh, I think it's really building up into like a really cool way to end the year and like put a big like climax on this big experiment, I guess, that has been happening. And there's like no equivalent to last year or like in previous years of CDH. Like the growth has just been like absolutely crazy and awesome to see.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't play cEDH consistently until April of this year. Could you kind of tell me how different is it from the tournament scene it was of 2022?
There are tournaments.
Oh, really? There just weren't tournaments before?
There are tournaments.
It was definitely like, in terms of like in-person large events, there'd be like maybe 2 or something a year. It'd be close. Like there'd usually be like a Marchesa and then like something else. And then online events, again, like post, COVID, like that's kind of like the growth of cEDH, but like definitely to like the scale that we're at now, there's really like the last year has absolutely been the biggest year where we've had like, I mean, how many events has just Eminence alone done this year? Like 6, something like that, of in-person events. Plus like now we have usually like, it seems like every Saturday there's like 2 cEDH online events that are like larger than the largest ones that we would have had like a year ago or 2 years ago. So the growth has been absolutely giant. It's been crazy big.
Yeah. And for in-person stuff, I feel like the States, in terms of like large events, I feel like the United States, just this area is like actually the slowest to get to it because CDH already had a lot of big in-person events in like Brazil, Japan, Europe. So CDH was already there, like in those kind of like large quantities. And in fact, that's actually where I started like finding deck list for like different types of things that I like was just what are other, areas of the world? What's their technology like? What's their meta like? Is there something that I can apply and be applicable here? Did I overlook a random card from Tempest, things like that. So now that, it's really grown here, I think the sky's the limit for CDH in terms of just what it's going to do for the community at large in terms of growth. I mean, it's been nice to get back into competitive Magic for myself. Cookout was kind of the first event I'd been to in a while since since post COVID. I think I played in like a PPTQ or something like that since then. But regardless, I like kind of abandoned 60 card formats. Love and behold, because of me getting back into CDH, I'm now playing like Legacy. So, I'm back into it. Right now I'm playing Beseech Doomsday Storm. So that deck's pretty wild.
Beseech Storm looks so cool. I've been watching it. Oh man, I love it.
Oh, it's a blast. It's an absolute blast. Plus, there happens to be this Bryant Cook guy that, keeps making these great Storm decks. So I just like leech off what he's doing and then go from there. So
yeah, Beseech is broken. Beseech is a really powerful card.
Yeah, it's been pretty good in like just testing. Like, have you had a chance to play in any other deck?
Yeah. So I mean, my other decks that I play consistently right now are Obnixilis, Captive Kingpin. I had one of the original builds for that. I brewed with my buddy when he was spoiled. We haven't quite tested Beseech in that one yet. Yeah, so I haven't gotten to test Beseech in there, and then we had it in the Talion deck for a minute, and then we took it out because we didn't think we had enough things to sacrifice for it. So I have never actually cast the card, but I feel like it's really good, and I've seen people cast it against me. It gets silenced a bunch.
So what are some like other ways that so you talked about other decks that you play, like, all right, do you have any other decks that you like enjoy as much as Kinnan that you just like don't think are as positioned as well? Like, are you big on like the green or like simic pile of stuff? Like, do you like decks like Dawn Waker, or are you just like dedicated on Kinnan, or do you even play like other formats of Magic?
So right now, I don't currently play other formats of Magic, which I think a lot of that goes to the proxy rules of other formats of Magic. I'm not ready to drop $1,000 in a modern deck. Yeah, I'm not ready for that. I am pretty committed to Kinnan. I have my Kinnan altar, and I have my custom Kinnan playmat.
Oh snap!
Yeah. Do we have a Bleach fan in the house?
We do have a Bleach fan. It's my Kinnan is Ulquiorra. My thought process was, I think everyone views Kinnan as strong, but no one views him as the strongest. And I think that me on Kinnan makes him the strongest deck. And I think that Ulquiorra was recognized as strong as Espada number 4, but secretly he was the strongest Espada of them all. So I thought he was a good representation for me. And then I have the playmat is Thorn Mammoth marrying Seaborn Muse with Tezzeret as the officiant and all the other characters around. It's happening in Gaia's Cradle, and Wanderer Cake's a flower girl, Manglehorn's the ring-bearing dog, Tidespout and Hullbreaker are throwing a wedding bouquet of flowers and Moxen back and forth like the combo. But no,
Love
really,
it.
I do love Kinnan. Like the deck is such a fucking blast. It's so much fun to play. I do think that it's the deck that I pilot the best. I do think it is one of the strongest decks. So it just all checks all the boxes for being my tournament deck.
Mhm.
I also think like as a player, Kinnan is a really good politics deck, and I tend to be a very good talker. The fact that it's a non-deterministic deck, where a lot of other decks are slamming just these things on the board that if you let them have them, they 100% win the game, and there's
Yeah.
just like not a lot of question about it. It's very hard to politic when you're a Rogside deck slamming it ad nauseum. But if someone else is like, oh, they just tutored for breach and I need to find answers to them, well, I'm going to play the Seedborn Muse, and I think you guys understand that I might need to spin to find some answers for you because it's non-deterministic value. Like you
Mhm.
can argue a lot of things in your favor as a Kinnan deck, especially as one that it doesn't win right away. And so it's like, oh, we have time to deal with that. That's the next issue, but we have to deal
Yeah.
with this first, and we understand that that's part of dealing with this issue. And I think that lets you kind of slide in there in a lot of ways, which is really nice. But when I'm playing Ob Nixilis, I lose that ability. It's very hard to politic as Ob Nixilis Captive Kingpin. Talion is a deck I'm getting into. I do think I'm a very good control pilot, and I think that Talion is a deck I will play well versus Ob Nixilis. Like I don't think I'm the best pilot in the world for it. It's just something I can do. But yeah, they lack the raw, I think, potential of Kinnan, and that's what draws it into me. Is it's my tournament deck, along with being obviously committed at this point.
Yeah, I think Kenan also benefits from the fact that we're gonna always see like tons of non-humans printed in the near future. Like there's always gonna be the next like probably like overcosted big like creature with an insane effect on the game. And if you're able to get it into play within those colors, it breaks the game wide open. And I just think that those two colors specifically, Wizards likes to print like simic good stuff. So I think we'll be okay. I think we'll see some stuff
Give
here
us
in the
Hull
near
Breacher.
future.
Bring back Hull Breacher. Give me treasures.
Oh god. Please don't. We already got the
I didn't get to
Bowmaster.
experience it.
We don't
I
need
didn't
it.
get to experience it. I want
You're lucky.
treasures.
What do you
so they
mean?
come.
You got to dodge it. You didn't have to experience it.
Dude, I'm sorry. He is a non-human that makes treasures in blue. Gimme. I would love that. I really want another card advantage creature, though. I really want another like Consphinx and as a Hall slot. I think that's one thing we're missing.
Eric and I bring up a lot, and this is only like I guess kind of tangentially related to Kinnan, of how WotC just seems to hate green right now, and how like almost every new card that gets spoiled, Eric talks about how it could have been green and how awesome it would be in Corvold. Um, do you feel like green is still being kind of ignored in terms of like new powerful stuff that we get? Because it's been my opinion that like black and green both have sort of been, and like a lot of their power is just like old cards, and like a lot of like red, specifically their power has been in very new cards.
Well, are you coming from the perspective of Magic in totality or the perspective of just CEDH?
Um, Mainly CDH because like green's actually pretty good in a lot of the other formats right now. I feel
Yeah,
like
that's
and
yeah,
then
'cause
mono
green-
black is just a deck in every format because you just run the last 2 years of black cards. That's just a deck that just wins.
it's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to kind of ask yourself, does WotC give a shit about CDH for one thing in terms of when they are making cards? I don't think that we're the format they're actually designing for. So that can be a little bit, confusing to answer here because I don't think it's that they're ignoring, it's that they don't care. They're building for their other formats and they're building for Commander in general. And I don't think that CDH is really their biggest whales of money coming in. It is more the Commander format for casuals. So they're looking more at the like splashy triple damage effect that obviously isn't playable in CDH, but it's going to make people open some packs. You know what I mean? And then occasionally you get cards like Jewel Lotus that are just broken as shit. But in terms of, if you're thinking of recent cards that are awesome, I mean, yeah, the last few years for red, if you're looking at like the last 5 years in total, you get Dockside and Underworld Breach and all that kind of stuff. With green, there hasn't been a ton for CDH, I guess, in the last few years outside of like Finale Devastation is bonkers, and then random overcosted effects that Kinnan gets to take advantage of. I guess Delighted Halfling is a cool new addition. Black, Shieldred's cool. Bowmasters is awesome. White has done the most. White has definitely gotten the most in the last few years. I think by like an actual mile. White has definitely gotten the most. Blue has still gotten like consistently like, oh, now they have Force Negation. Now they have Offer You Can't Refuse. Lots of other effects. Yeah, I guess they have. If I was WotC and I'm deciding to care about CDH, I would be intrigued by getting green a couple of things. I think that would be a good place to start. I don't think you want to push red any harder. I think that white is kind of inherently becoming insane. And I think black is already just so strong. Like the unconditional tutors are
hard
so
to
broken.
Power creep a lot of the good black cards because they're just like it's like the old Yu-Gi-Oh cards where it's just like they have so few text that's how you know they're broken. Or it's just like
Yep.
Dark Ritual, Demonic Tutor, just like, sure, we could make it even cheaper, make more mana. Why would we do that? These are already like pushed card levels.
To ask you, what effect would you give green next? Like if you were designing a cEDH green card that you think would be like, okay, we want to make something that's a little bit stapley for green, what space would you design that in?
I think the thing that if you wanted to just push green, like if that's the goal, the thing that they miss that they've given most other colors are the sort of, you play the game, we're going to punish you for that effect. Like anything that says whenever a player, those are the big ones that have been very powerful lately. Like Bowmasters, Esper Sentinel, Rhystic Mystic. Dockside is like functionally this sort of effect also. Dothi Voidwalker is almost this way as well, where like it makes people have to reevaluate whether what they want to do is actually worth it anymore. So I think like those sort of asymmetrical hate pieces and loose quotes that are usually value oriented, those are like the quickest way to break something open. I don't really know what effect I want for green. And I think, again, like it depends on, like, I think the best designs would be cEDH playables that are green cards first and foremost. Like, I really hate how low pip they are on most effects. Like, something like Orcish Bowmasters, you give it double black. You know, like Grand Abolisher, I think, is a good example of like, that's a card that has a cost to run, but it's really good and it's worth it. So you do it, but sometimes it's awkward. Dockside being 1 pip, what the heck? Like, a lot of these effects. So I think, I'm not sure exactly what effect I want, but almost certainly you can put anything like whenever a player, something related to an artifact or enchantment, you could make it a green. You know, if you wanted to make a green Rhystic Study, you certainly could. Everyone would hate it. I already hate the blue one. I'm sure Eric probably has some like specific ideas of what he wants. Like he specifically, not for green, but like he really wanted Lotho to be Rakdos so bad so he could run it in Corvold.
Just to be here, heard it here first, folks. Green Rhystic Study has gotten the okay for cEDH. That's give me that.
We're good. Print it up.
We're good to go. We're good to go.
Oh no, just because white, like, so I think one thing, I think red is getting completely continuously punished for the sins of Dockside. If you really think about like staple cards that have been printed, like inherently, there just hasn't been anything really since Dockside. Like at first, everybody's like, oh, you know, Jessica's Will was really good, but Jessica's Will is not played in every deck, and nor should be. You know, like when we think about the power of the red cards, it's really like Dockside, Breach, and then we have good cards like Bergie. I think the Final Fortune effects, but those are all old. Like we haven't really had like that ground. We haven't had like a good kind of
Deflecting Swat.
Deflecting Swat, yeah.
Why?
But
Deflecting Swat, Ragavan.
Ragavan's pretty good. It's so weird that some decks don't run Ragavan.
It's a red mana dork that also can be card advantage for 1 mana. It's wild. It stores it up. It's color fixing. Like it's crazy.
It's I mean, Ragavan's pretty solid. I mean, I like Ragavan.
Mine only hits lands, so like my Ragavans tend to be pretty weak. But I've seen my opponents cast a good one or two.
Dude, I had a Ragavan the other day, hit the same guy twice. First one was his Mana Crypt, second one was his Adnos. I was like, come on.
I will say last time I played it in Najeela, I hit Grand Abolisher and then an opponent's what the heck is the green enchantment that combos with Najeela?
Druid's Repository?
Yeah, I hit Grand Abolisher and then Druid's Repository, and I was like, okay, well, this card's pretty good.
Yeah.
I like there being like a level of like, I don't think the format is like super homogenous as like some people might suggest. I would like green to get like just a little push of even just like interesting cards that happen, because like, again, like kind of like you mentioned, like Kinnan is more likely to get a good green card than like Dawnwaker Thrasios is right now, because they'll print some big green thing in a commander set at some point. That's crazy. Like that's just gonna happen. So just something I'd like for it. You know, it doesn't have to be Dockside level. We can learn. We don't have to do that. But you know, I'd like for it to get a little bit of a push so that like the green piles are more of a consideration, and they're not just like Eric and I like to poke fun a lot at like Dawnwaker Thrasios is just a Kinnan deck. Like they're just looking to do Kinnan. So like a lot of the green decks are just like, how do I win with Kinnan currently? And so, you know, a little bit more versatility in some of those piles would be nice.
I agree. I mean, that is true. Like even it's the secret commander of Darker Thras. It's the secret commander of Dawnwaker. Like Kinnan is awesome, and it's even better when you just put him in the command zone.
Yeah, one thing I would like to see for green specifically would be like maybe a completion of the Veil cycle, because we have 2 Veils right now. So just a continuation of that. I think that just having functional, simple tools that are undercosted, that aren't inherently going to break something wide open. You can print it in a commander set exclusive so it doesn't warp modern or whatever that is. I think having tools like that, or just answers that don't effectively just go into every deck that touches green. Like, that's the one thing I don't like, is when they do print an answer to maybe like an issue in the format, or, and I know it's obviously not specifically for cEDH, but Thassa's Oracle is a legacy win condition, those type of things. Being able to have counterplay, I think just having more counterplay to things while also functionally being a decent card on its own, those are the kind of cards that I really like and I'd like to see more of. And I think that's kind of where Magic's design space is now. There's virtually no blank, like there's literally no blank text on any card in Throne of Eldraine or Wilds of Eldraine. So just moving forward, I'd like to see a little bit more of that functionality. I was really hoping that maybe in these modal cards that we have, the adventure cards, that there would have been a little bit more play to it. I haven't like took a super deep dive on it because I got caught up with Beseech and then Agathos like Cauldron, which that card's wild and modern, but I haven't really looked into anything else. Have you seen anything from Wilds of Eldraine that you specifically like for Kenan?
I mean, Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a consideration that I will test. I'm a believer that in the more control Kinnan lists, you only want to have one non-land, non-Thrasios outlet, and I think Mirage Mirror is better because when you only have one, you want to value accessibility, and Mirage Mirror gets got by Trophy Mage, Energy Refractor, if you're on that, gets got by Moonsilver Key. They don't get got by the other one, but all the other artifact tutors get them, but Cauldron doesn't get got by Trophy Mage or Moonsilver Key, so it's less accessible. But I'm going to test it out for sure and see if it is valuable enough to, mean running a second outlet. Outside of that, though, not really. Like the sets haven't been great for Kinnan lately. The best thing that ever happened to us was the Wondering. We're the best Wondering deck by far for any of the tier archetypes, just already making a ton of mana, being a Seaborn deck, being a Manamo deck, being an Artifact Tutor deck. It's pretty wild how good it is with us. I really want green to get like some more stack interaction in some way. I understand it can't have like legitimate counter spells, and they touched on this in, I think it was Commander Legends 2 Baldur's Gate. They gave like a green dragon in adventure half or something
like
similar
stifled,
that
I think
it like stifled a very specific type of effect. Like they started to go down the right path, but it wasn't good enough type thing.
I was gonna say, if we're gonna be finishing cycles, we could throw around some elemental blasts. Around here we can get the green, white, and black elemental blast. I'd be so they would just legacy would never recover, but for it would be really interesting in Commander, because those like for I think Commander are like fine enough like they're not pushed cards at Commander's power level. I think.
Well, how would you feel about if the blasts went against the enemy cycles? So if it was like the green blast was counter target blue or black spell and destroy target blue or black permanent, would that be too good?
Oh, it would be better. They could even do 2 new red and blue ones that hit their enemies as well. That gotta be ridiculous. It would certainly be interesting when like every deck can just pop out a 1 mana counter spell, but it is like kind of situational. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm interested. I'm down for big shakeups. Like I don't mind when there's like some crazy new thing. And I think it's really hard to break this format.
I just want Dockside banned. I'm so sick of Dockside.
But it's so good when you Fimage it.
I know, but I think the fact that it is really good to Fimage, but the fact that it color fixes, it's so easy to cast, it's a combo piece that you can blink, it's the ultimate ritual, it's broken beyond belief. Like everything else, the way I think about it, someone's like, oh, ban Thassa's Oracle. I'm like, okay, if you ban Thassa's Oracle, then there's just a next best win condition. Thassa's Oracle isn't an engine that changes how you play the game.
Yeah.
Dockside is an engine that completely warps how you can play the game. It's wild how broken it is.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that, because something I always like to point out of like, when you want to change like a format, it makes more sense to address a play pattern than it does like what it causes, what makes us shuffle up and play a new one. Unless there's like something exceptional, if we're doing it turn 1, if the games are ending turn 1, it's a little bit different, all the time. But like play patterns are what are annoying. That's why like I think Ristic Study is the most bannable stupid piece of cardboard. Partially because annoying play pattern punishes playing the game, period. It's already in the best color, which they don't really think about like when they're making commander bans. But yeah, I definitely agree that like hit play styles, hitting Dockside specifically would change the format so much. Me and Eric have talked about it. Like you would have to delete the deck list database because it's just like it's all useless.
Yeah, I mean, so many decks are entirely based around Dockside. Like Corvald, sorry to say it, is no longer a deck. If you get rid of Dockside, you know what I mean? Sisay Weatherlight Captain is pretty much not a deck. Like all of them still technically exist as decks, but like not anywhere near their current level because they are in the category of Dockside decks. Kenrith is a Dockside deck. All of these turbo strategies, like, oh, I'm ad nausing and I'm hoping to hit Dockside. You know what I mean? Like that is it's the hope. It really will change the format a ton. But yeah, I mean, hitting the win conditions doesn't change how the format plays. Hitting the ultimate engine pieces that break the game is how you change and warp a format.
Kind of going back on when you were talking about like Agatha's and potentially like testing new cards or whatever. I kind of wanted to get an idea of your thought process when testing new cards, like how you like to, for example, like if you have 5 new cards you want to test, would you swap in 5 cards? And like, what do you want to see in a card? Like, how often do you want to see it? Like, what is the testing process for a new potential like slot look like?
I mean, it depends on what the card is doing, what type of slot it's filling for sure. Like the most recent card I like tested heavily and checked out was Karn the Great Creator over the last like couple months. And I mean, it's like the hardest thing to test in Kinnan because it's not something that we ever have accessibility to. It's just random value, but the card is so broken that I'm like forced to play it now, even though it goes against all of the silver bullet flexibility that I preach about. But like the card I was swapping in and out with card to test was Soulless Jailer for a little bit. And when I'm considering how much I like this card, especially if it's something that's like a tutorable creature, is how often am I tutoring for this? Is this something that I actually really want to get? Is it coming up in a lot of matchups? And it was a surprising amount. Soulless Jailer was really, really impressive. I decided it was worse than Karn, but that's definitely like, do I tutor for it is a huge, huge thing. Am I happy to see the card or does it feel like it was a dead draw? That kind of stuff. I want to see the card a bunch of times. I think it's really stupid to evaluate your deck when you just like don't see the card for a while and you're like, oh, I guess it's not good enough. Like, no, you have to see it. But then you also have to feel the effects of what you took out. So like when I was testing those slots, the first thing I took out for a little bit to test it was Trophy Mage. And I immediately recognized multiple games that I would have been able to win if Trophy Mage was in the deck because I would have been able to get it with like a Quarter Calling to get Basalt. And so I was like, okay, so this is worse than Trophy Mage, like for sure. And so you kind of got to balance things out and figure out, is it actually better than certain things is a huge question mark. Because so like right now, my testing process when I'm checking out a card, I take out Karn as the test slot. Not saying that Karn will be the takeout, but just because it's easy to take out Karn to test things because it doesn't change any of how the deck functions because Karn is such a random broken value. And then if I actually like the card, then I ask myself the question, okay, 1, is this better than Karn? And usually the answer is no. And then 2, is it better than something else in the deck? And do I think it fills that slot well? And also then you have to adjust for the meta to some extent. Like, because we're still in this turbo proactive focus meta, especially with rounds getting shorter and people being even more focused on proactivity, I'm really interested in having those like early stacks pieces. So I don't want to cut stuff like the Manglehorn or the Archaics or the Glenelendra, and like even Karn as well fills that same role. It's super hard to cut into right now. A lot of people are telling me to cut the Scrap Gorger. I love the Scrap Gorger. Such a cool card. I don't know. I love it. It's graveyard hate, blocks a Timna, it doesn't die to Bowmaster. It's Rainbow Dork, does everything I need it to do. And it's one of the cards that just consistently overperformed for me.
Can you touch on Wandering Archaic a little bit?
Oh, so broken.
There's a little bit of I've seen the commentary on it's basically garbage. So can you expound about someone who actually plays Wandering Archaic and has like real world experience with it, can tell like why the card's even in the deck?
Yeah, I mean, the people who say it's garbage have just goldfished the deck and never actually played it in a game. Is what I can say to that. Wandering Archaic is a grand abolisher half the time. It is wild the effect it can has. I've even had some games where like this might be shocking to hear, but I've like had an invasion of my core for X=5 against multiple turbo decks before, and I've gotten Wandering Archaic, not Seedborn, because it literally tells them that they cannot win the game. Oh, you want to Adnaz? You have to give me an Adnaz first. Oh, you want to try and counter stuff? Nah. And it also is such a good political tool for making everyone come together. And Kinnan just wants to buy time and make the game continue. Well, guess what? Everyone's counterspell against a different opponent is now 2 counterspells they have to beat. So it lets everyone take on the table together super, super well. Keep the game going. You get random generic value like, oh, I have to cast this Brainstorm here to dig. Sure, you get one too. You know what I mean? Oh, I have to cast this Tutor. I guess you get an Enlightened Tutor too, my guy. Like, I don't know. It does so much random generic value. It makes it so other people can't win the game because they're just going to lose any counter war against the table. And then when it's eventually time for you to try to win the game, no one is beating you in a counter war because every single counter spell, you just copy it. It's so funny. I've had multiple judge calls in tournaments over it because people get pissed when I don't let them take it back. You cast a deflecting swat. Sorry, you're tapped out, bro. I'm going to deflecting swat your deflecting swat with my copy. So yeah, card overperforms. Like genuinely, I tutor for that card a lot. It's a really good like I'm gonna win piece. It's a super great thing. Like there's a lot of games that had the win in hand, and I have a way to tutor out Archaic the turn before, and like I do that, and it just kind of ensures that the table will be able to take on anything the table is doing, and then also makes it really likely that I'll be able to push through the win on my turn as long as everyone is too low on mana. You're like actively looking at everyone's mana untapped when you have a Wandering Archaic on board to see if they're able to pay for it.
Yeah, it's a really good explanation. I just wanted to like hear somebody who's like played with the card pretty extensively versus like some just like random headcanon or something like that. So
I love the card. I think it's awesome. I definitely think that's another example of like if you test that card in another deck, it's gonna have a way different context. Or if you're thinking about it like I'm a whatever, I'm a blue farm player or whatever, and like if you would think of the card like I'm a blue farm player, yeah, it doesn't seem like it makes nearly as much sense as like a Grand Abolisher. Like if you compare it to Grand Abolisher, what Grand Abolisher's role is though is different. Where Wandering Archaic leans into I can set this down now and it's going to generate me value and help me win in 2 turns. Like it's going to do all of the things I want a card to do in play for these next 3 turns. It's going to help me set up a win because people absolutely. I've seen so many people like demonic tutor into my Wandering Archaics, and they're just like, "Oh, well, I got to do it." So many bad decisions have been made after saying, "Well, I've got to do it" in cEDH, specifically with a Wandering Archaic in play. I had a game in tournament where 2 Wandering Archaics were in play of different players, and it was just like a guaranteed draw. Like it is so hard to win when everybody is doubling counter spells. Even 1 player, but especially 2 players, it especially makes it like almost impossible to actually get through unless you already have like a startling advantage to push through it.
Yeah. Or just infinite mana.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Wandering Archaic definitely shows better in slower strategies that want to take on the table over turns. So like we are running it in our Talion list right now. And it's been awesome there because again, like, oh, we've played the Wandering Archaic, so cool. This cycle, if someone else has the interaction, we can make sure we're still stopping people, and then our counter magic just gets harder to deal with. Like in strategies that aren't just trying to go for it right away, like something with a Grand Abolisher, it can be really, really powerful.
So something interesting is happening. So we're switching to I think 75-minute like time clocks for tournaments. How do you think does that affect your deck in any way, or do you think that actually helps your deck?
My deck, nah, I think it's about the same. I mean, my games, honestly, they go one of 3 ways most of the time. It's either I lose in the first couple turns of the game because someone just has it. Good for them. Good shit. Or I get a crazy nutty win, which is very rare, but a couple times I've been able to put out like a turn 2, turn 3 win in a tournament. And then there's the grind game, which is where I'm the most comfortable. And in that grind game, I'm generally pushing for the win, like around that 75 to 90 minute mark anyway. So it's like, been fine. I've only had 1 game ever go to a draw that wasn't intentional. So, and in all the other games I've been able to close out in time. Some of them were really close, but it's still fine. So I don't think it changes my deck at all. The annoying thing is it is making the meta slightly more turbo focused, which is kind of our weakness. So continuously having to deal a mulligan with that is a little annoying. I think it's kind of shitty that stacks decks are being pushed out. I'm happy to see time gone just because I hate time, but like other stacks decks, I feel like they deserve a chance. So I feel bad for them, and they were definitely like I've definitely heard stories of this people decks who like, oh, we didn't quite get there just because of the time clock. But at the same time, I totally empathize with the fact that the tournaments were grueling all day experiences to just be a 1-day tournament to have to go so long, especially for the European players who like I want them to have access to these events.
Yeah.
They're so talented. I want to play against them, and you know, hearing them feel dead in the finals at 5 a.m. just wanting to go to sleep. That's not what I want the finals to be. I want to see the best players against the best players.
Yeah, things have not been easy. One, stacks just kind of struggle to win currently, and then yeah, making it. I think it especially hurts like kind of like specialist players because usually if you see like a stacks deck, you know, kind of randomly top 4 or something, it's always these like specialists who are like very good on stacks, they're very good with their time, they really understand what they're doing, and then like hurting those players who like they have the ability to, they are like a top 4 level player, they can take down an event. That does suck, but again, like you're saying, like these events are like you can barely get through them if you're, you know, anywhere other than the US. It is really hard to sit through when the event is starting, like already like I kind of want to go to bed and you have like, you know, 10-12 hours of Magic to play. Yeah, it's pretty rough, but I definitely think overall it's mostly just like fine or neutral for a lot of the decks, and it will affect whatever a higher percentage of games will go to a draw. But from what I've heard, they're in their testing and they've looked through like the history of games and how they end. roughly how quickly, and it barely changes much of the numbers. So I think it's
Yep.
just like a good change, and I'm also glad to just see like experimentation whenever, like do an event at 75, do an event at 60. Like if you want to
Mhm.
try it out or whatever.
I really like the idea that comedian posted the other day, where
Mhm.
he was like 85 minutes and then just like a 10-minute cap on the extra turn, and that's it. I think that would be a really good consistent time base because the unlimited time cap on the extra turn is what has made these rounds go so
Yeah.
wild. I think it was like last chaos. There was one that went 45 minutes over and it had a judge in the whole time and there was no slow play. It was actually just a guy going for wild win attempts and the whole table stopping him like multiple times on his turn. And that's where it gets grueling. And like SCG Con Columbus had actual turns.
Mm.
So every single round went like an extra hour at least past the round timer. It was miserable, like
Yeah.
absolutely miserable. So I think something that's consistent would be better than like even I think the initial round timer is like less important as long as having like cap so that the end time is consistent to keep tournaments flowing would be really, really nice. But you do want to give everyone the capability to play. And I think that if you do get to these really short rounds, it pushes certain decks just out of viability and that changes the meta. And I don't think we want the meta adjusted just because, oh, the round is this way. We want the meta adjusted for what is actually the best deck because that's why we're in a tournament and why we're playing CDH.
It kind of makes me want to see, like right now we're like really Eminence, like 9 out of 10 events, are Eminence or something. So
Mhm.
I would like to see more TOs if they step in to like be willing to just be like, this is an event where whatever, we're gonna start super early in the day or a different time, and we're gonna have like, you know, 2 hour rounds or something, 2 hour round limits. To just being able to like experiment. I would really like to see events that are just like shorter rounds, or just fewer rounds, as just like, and even just like a lower stakes thing, because one of the biggest things for me in events isn't like round timers. It's just like, God, we have to play like a million of these rounds. It doesn't matter if you put them at like 75 minutes. It's still like, we're going to be here a while. And so I'd like to see like small stakes tournaments maybe that are just like, yep, we're going to have 3 rounds cut to top four, whatever, to cut to top
Yeah.
16, uh, whatever time limit. Just like a lot more experimentation, because like we're getting to the point now where it's not just like, oh man, there's a CDH tournament. Like we get them all the time. And so
Mhm.
trying to like dial in on like, oh, this group of people really likes this, so we'll host this. It also makes it like more of a decision when there's two events on the same day, when they have like
Mhm.
kind of a different structure, and you can be like, okay, well, I really enjoy getting to play this way. My deck does better into the turn like time limit or whatever. But definitely agree with what you said about like comedian's idea being really good, because that's like the spirit of turns doesn't really line up with CDH because of how long the turns get.
Yeah,
uh,
especially if you're already at a board state that you've gone to time, it means that there is a wild
yeah.
board state that the game is still continuing. So if you're giving everyone extra turns within that board state, those are the turns that will take the most time. So that's
Yeah.
miserable. I think we're at a place right now though where I'm either be interested in less rounds or more rounds because I'm so sick of just like winning a couple games and then IDing in. I
Mhm.
want to play Magic. I'm like I regret continuously IDing at this point. Which even last Mox Masters, I they offered me the ID on round 3 and I was on the play and I said no. We were all 2-0. I said we're playing. And like
Yeah.
I got off to a dominant start with Karn and Seedborn and was spinning and like doing my thing. And then they were able to push through a toxic deluge and I'd already cast Kinnan a couple times. They were all locked out under Karn. The guy flashed me 3 more answers to Kinnan and was like, can we draw? I was like, yeah, whatever. But that is like, but then you just ID in at that point, and I don't know. I want to play Magic, and we need to be incentivized to play more. I think that is
Mhm.
huge. And I think either less rounds, more rounds, or different pairings is the answer to that in some equation. There's value in IDing to get to the top 16, but I also like do care about playing the fun games, which the fun games during tournaments are also like some of the most fun Magic because everyone's like a little more relaxed but still having a good time.
Yeah.
One thing I've realized, so just playing from like different card games and stuff. So like Yu-Gi-Oh didn't have, when I played like competitively back in the like 2000s to the mid 2000s to around like 2010. There, I don't know what it's like now. I haven't even checked, but there was no IDing. You couldn't. You actually had to determine a winner, and it very much changes going from you're 6-0, 7-0, and you can just draw your last round to top 8 or whatever till you may not top 8 at X and 2, so it really mattered. Like you had to play your games. It was really important to do that. Like where I was playing in nationals was a 12 round day one. We didn't finish till 1 in the morning.
Wow.
And I lost round one or round two, like I won round one, lost round two. And I had to play 10 straight matches and I had to win every single one to top 16 and then go on to top 8 and whatnot. But it was just such a wild grind to have to do that versus like could have probably ID'd the last maybe 2 rounds because, just tiebreakers and all that type of stuff if it was more under Magic's rules. I'm just curious if there's going to be a thing for where CDH is just going to take the competitive formula where it just, if it's a 5 round event, you 3-0, you just go, and then now you're 3-0 and 2, and you top whatever. So I wonder if there's going to be any change to that, or if they're going to be consistent with what they're doing now. Because one thing I think Alex is running a 64-person tournament. It's like 4 rounds. So I think that might be a nice, what Matt was alluding to, some of that kind of that cleaner, faster solution. And I think that something like those type of tournaments would be like the equivalent of like the 5-0 dailies for constructed Magic, because we don't really have that. Because we, as for whatever reason, the community gauges, decks power and strength based on its performance in like 64 plus events. But yet, if you look at any other type of event, a lot of the leagues and the daily things, that's where all the ideas come from. So if we had some variation of that, I think that would really help. And it would allow people to probably test newer strategies in a less demanding environment. So if you've got a new strategy and you think it's pretty good and you've tested it, but you don't want to necessarily put it in on a Mox Masters event, or probably better yet, like an Eminence 160 player event, you would like to I'd like to, get like a nice 40, 50 player event that's online and you can kind of test that more frequently. I think we would actually start seeing different results. Not necessarily say it would drastically change, but I think newer ideas or new experimentations, like you said, like the Italian deck you're working on right now, like that's probably going to be a sweet deck if enough people put behind it. We've seen the revolution of just people just jumping on Mardu Summer, jumping on that, and then playing different decks of that volition there. So I just think having those smaller kind of mid tournaments that still matter are really important for the growth of any format. So that's just my like ramble take on that.
No, I agree. I think that would actually be fantastic. And it would let people really test things. And I think it would get a lot of people into tournament play, because it can be a little daunting for some newer players, especially now that I'm also doing coaching and I'm talking to some players. And they're like, oh, I eventually want to get to the point where I'm playing Mox Masters and Chaos and everything. And they feel like it's this daunting task of like, I need to get to this certain level before I can do it. And I mean, me personally, I just like played CDH for a week and then immediately entered Mox Masters May. And like that was where we were at. And I think it was really good to just jump into that fire and immediately push yourself. But yeah, like I think having smaller events that they could just like test things out, get their feet wet with tournament play, get the jitters out, I think would be fantastic for getting more people into the format.
It's kind of like a tournament light experience of just like a little step that you can take. Because again, and I kind of agree with you where it's just like if you want to play CDH, just kind of go play, just kind of jump in there and get in there. But I also get like when you see so many people in there, you see like all these players that you know by name. Like you get in the players meeting and you're just like, oh, these are the people that I'm trying to learn from. Like it can be a little intimidating. And then also just like one thing I'm not the biggest fan of with online tournaments is like you can almost be like more anxious about the logistics of just like everybody thinks everybody might be cheating. I have to make sure like I keep my hand here, make sure my webcam setup is this, make sure I don't move around. And just like those little things add up to make players like really anxious, and having again like a slightly more relaxed like type event would just be nice to be able to help get those people. And it's something we always focus on. It's just like getting people in the door is like the biggest hurdle, and the smaller you can make it, the better things are going to be.
Yeah, I think that's why I really push like setting a tone at the beginning of getting into everyone's mask, ask how everyone's day going, how you feeling right now, make a couple of jokes, set the tone really nicely, but also keep things aware. And like I have been doing for this last tournament, I was like, okay, guys, like you're welcome to shuffle a little bit now, but we're just gonna wait till all 4 people are here. We know someone's recording the screen, then we'll start actually shuffling. Nothing against anyone, just doing it all clean, guys. Just like keeping everyone in this like light, everything's gonna be fine tone. I think just keeps everything comfortable.
Again, there's a difference level if you've never played like states, when it was states and then regionals and then like a PTQ and then nationals and Grand Prix to the Pro Tour. Every tournament, while still ultimately trying to lead you to that end goal, has a different feel for it. You're going to see way more exploration on states decks than you are at regionals, because regionals is the event after states. States is the deck where people try to kind of fill out the format. cEDH doesn't inherently have that. Like we don't have those feeler tournaments where I played in states, it was 500 people. It's still quite large, but it has a very much different feel than a 1,200 player regionals or I played in Grand Prix DC, and I had 2,200 players. There's a bigger feel, and there's a different feel to that. But a lot of those decks, if you don't have like testing teams or like Discord servers that you're on, that you're testing like, the average player who doesn't have that, they're not really getting a lot of experience outside of their, competitive Discord server or whatever. They might grab a couple of games a week or like that. But, having those events where you actually can also see like, how decks do in those events, you actually get to see patterns, because that's the kind of the chokehold point that we're seeing now is people want to argue. They wanted the data. Now that we have data on tournaments, and now they don't like the data because it doesn't go with their narrative. So you can't have it both ways. You can't create all these excuses for decks, that reason why they didn't top, or because this player didn't play it, or anything like that. When you extrapolate that over time, you actually get to see more patterns and things kind of trending and forming. We've seen Tivit do this. We've seen Tivit do this. We're seeing it kind of come back up now. That's kind of a great example of that, is just like, if it wasn't for the frequency of these tournaments, we wouldn't see these type of metas, or just how like the meta might be wildly different in, SEG Columbus, or how it was quite a bit different in the last tournament we just had. So I just think that having more frequent tournaments, and I think stores are doing a really great job now. They're getting more out there. It's just nice seeing like people in the community like Alex running these type of events that have cleaner rules, cleaner camera setups that are going to really help people feel like that they can get good quality Magic, still have a lot of fun while playing, but also, it's 4 rounds cut. I mean, that's super sweet and simple. So
yeah, I think also like data wise, it might be a little bit harder with cEDH, just because it is 4-player pods, which leads to a little bit more, variability. Politics isn't really a thing in 1-on-1, but it exists within cEDH.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I also disagree with in the same and respectfully in the same regard, because let's say we'll say Timna Crom. Timna Crom has the most wins this year. It is 6. I don't think that there is a quantifiable way to say that Blue Farm's not a like top tier deck. Whether I agree it's the best deck, or I don't even, or even do I enjoy it, but I think that'd be kind of hard to say. Like, well, it's variance. Variance wouldn't allow a deck to win 6 times like that. I mean, I just think that that's one of those things where, now if Blue Farm fell off the map and we have 3 years of data on it, and it just kind of disappeared for whatever reason, then yeah, maybe that was variance for that time. But I think there's an at least establishable pattern to some degree, because I mean, you're showing it. You're doing very well with Kenan. You're a good pilot. So, and Kenan for other players is doing very well. So I think it's fair to say that Kenan's a very powerful, very good deck based on the term results that we're seeing.
Definitely. No, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I think it just kind of scales with the amount of data that we have, where like which is something people do annoyingly, but they look at one event and they say, no Rockside in top 16, Rockside's bad. And then, okay, well, let's look at Rockside for the year. Oh, no, it's, like whatever, number 4, number 6, whatever.
My buddy told me the Adnaz Discord was freaking out after Cookout, where there was no Rocksides in top 16, and then immediately Zane is like killing people on Rockside. Yeah. Like, we're back. Like,
it's silly to fixate on like the small event, 'cause like you're saying, like, and it will maybe seem, kind of silly in 3 years that we fixated on the first 6 months of this year. Like when you look at it in the grand scope, it's like, oh, it's so obvious now that whatever is the best deck, because over time it's had, the best results of whatever. I think the data has made for interesting discussion and content, and definitely been like a big plus, along with like, again, the massive increase in the number of events that we've been able to have. Really, really, really been awesome. Before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you if you had just any sort of like predictions for either the meta of cEDH going forward later into this year or next year, or sort of the state of the game, what you think it might be looking like, or even just like random hot takes that you kind of want to drop on your way out.
Let me think here. I mean, I definitely think the meta is leaning faster. I think a lot of people are just really enjoying making your opponents have it, which is super frustrating for control players who can only have answers for so many people. A lot of greed going on, and it's definitely good to take advantage of that greed. Treat Rhystic Study like a sphere of resistance. It's not that hard. I think that Time is a terrible deck. I think it is a parasitic deck that just preys on the ignorance of everyone else, and if it's in a pot of people who understand how it works, it can't perform. Winota's bad. Kinnan's not bad. Tivit's a pretty good deck, but it's not S tier. But Tivit's really, really strong. terms of the game, though, I think that the best decks right now are either ones that, I mean, besides Brewers Advantage decks, I think there's always going to be Brewers Advantage decks that just like prey on ignorance, and they're going to be able to like snipe something for a little while, then they get known and they don't work as well. But the strongest decks are either the decks that do the thing the best, like the really, really fast decks, or the decks that have the best answers to those decks. Like if you're a deck that can play Grafdigger's Cage or Curse Totem or both of those, such a good spot to be in right now. In terms of 2024, I feel like something's gonna just break the fuck out of something. I don't know, Wizard. It's coming. It's coming. We got what is it? There's a Doctor Who set coming up, and then we have Modern Horizons 3 next year. There's gonna be some
Modern Horizons 3
bullshit in one of those. It's gonna be gross, dude. It's gotta be. It's gotta.
It has to be.
I think it's gonna be like dual colored elementals.
Oh god, that would be wild.
like the Simic Elemental or something. Oh, it'd be great.
When you
Exile a
mentioned
blue or green card.
Oh no, when you had mentioned earlier how they don't design for cEDH, I think I mostly agree with that. But I do think, and I've talked about this looking at like EDH rec trends and stuff, that over time, at least, not necessarily like, oh, it just happened. A lot of the way people build their commander decks gets closer to cEDH as we've gone on. And that cards that tend to be very appealing to a wide variety of commander players, instead of just like, oh, here's a card that obviously slots into like Prosper, for example, which every card does. I think the cards that are most just like, oh, I have to put this in my deck, and they get people really excited. Orcish Bowmaster was a great example where Sam Black had an article that was like, every commander player can say that they're going to run this because of some synergy that it has, because it has so much that it does. And it is an inherently broken card, but it also overlaps with everything that people want to do. And I think cards like Jewel Lotus that you mentioned are kind of an example of that, where like designs that work really well in cEDH just sneak their way into these commander products or Modern Horizons because good cards are good cards. And I definitely agree that Modern Horizons 3 Modern Horizons 2 is arguably the biggest set for like cEDH ever. Barring like probably Theros Beyond Death.
I mean, Ragavan, Dothy, the Elementals, like it was a wild set. Yavimaya, even Esper Sentinel. Ranger Captain was first Modern Horizons,
yeah.
Just so broken.
So I definitely expect some, and I look forward to it. Like because again, they've shown like if there's a whole bridge through, they'll get rid of it, for the most part. So I definitely look forward to it. I'm not worried at all about it because like I don't want to get bored with like, oh, the same decks are good forever. And I don't think we have the game solved, but just like throwing in, injecting a little bit of like, oh, here's a new, green gets a Ragavan or whatever. It's always fun and exciting. And, I think cEDH will always be a little bit more, variance filled and high rolly than maybe some people want it to be. But that's just, it's part of the game. That's just what we signed up for.
For sure. I mean, that's 4-player pods. I think it's what's so much fun is like finding consistency within that variance.
Yeah, absolutely. Like trying.
That's actually a great way to frame that. That was kind of the point I was trying to make earlier. Is just finding the consistency within the variance. So there's all this variance, and you see all these results. There is some consistency there. So we just got to look for it. And to all those haters who hate Rogsai, just leave it at that. Like listen to Zane. Zane's the man. So.
It was pretty funny at an LGS last week. I was sitting down with this guy to play cEDH, and he didn't know who I was. And we talked about cEDH for a second. He's like, I hate cEDH tournaments. Like those are just 100% luck. Whoever makes it to the finals. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. Like I kind of disagree with you. I was like, I don't know, man. It's like the same people every single time. There's like 10 guys who top 16 every tournament. And he's like, yeah, it's just luck. I was like, yeah, I don't think it is.
Just gotta get your luck up. That's all it is.
Just
grind out, get your luck better.
Skill issue clearly with luck. Skill issue. So
it was bad because like my first in-person event, it was SCG Con, and I was just drawing straight up God hands all weekend. But like that tournament was a little bit of luck. Like,
and it's always gonna be a factor, right? Like again, I always like to point this people out. Like if you go to an event and you scrub out, 0-7 or whatever, does that mean that you're a bad player? Obviously not. It can happen to anybody. You can just get bodied. You get God hands one day. You get, you mull to 4 every game, and another one. It's just what's going to happen. But again, when you look at the whole career and you see like top 4 here, top 16 here, top 4 here, it speaks for itself.
Yeah. My last top 16 game, I was going to have a turn 2 win, and I was in second seat. The guy in first seat did a turn 2 time twister. And I was like, okay, this will maybe still be fine. I have so much mana. I draw my hand. It is 6 lands and a March of Swirling Mist. And I was like, that's a shame.
The cEDH experience right there. All right, well, Max, anything you want to plug here before we get out? Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah. So I have a new podcast / YouTube series called Colors Or a Crutch, co-hosted with Max P. We can be found on YouTube under the channel Colors Or a Crutch. I'm an admin on the Kinnan Discord. I'm super active there and happy to answer questions. I do coaching as well. You can DM me on Discord or on Twitter, both at WoundedSatellite, which is everyone spells satellite wrong. Look up how to spell satellite first, I guess. And yeah, my name is Max Sternberg, also known as WoundedSatellite. And I thank you so much for having me on the Learning cEDH podcast.
I appreciate having you on.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying having the guests. You were great to talk to. And I love talking about Kenan. Like, I feel like this is one of the more, for how widespread it is, one of the more misunderstood decks of I've heard so many people just say, oh, it's just mana. What more do you need to know? But it's obviously a little bit more to it when everybody's playing the deck and, only like 3 people keep top 4ing with it over and over and over. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for watching here. If you enjoyed this video, let us know down below what you liked about it. It's looking like we're going to be making guest a more regular thing that we have here. So let us know, as I'm sure you already will, down below who you want to see in the next video, what topics you might want us to cover, what we missed out on, what we got wrong, what we got right. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Go play cEDH. Have a good one.